image. Perfect. And oh, okay. Let's share my screen. Ta-da. Okay, so one of the things that we will do, because we covered pretty much everything, we did the little focus group exercise last class. We have one more exercise, but I'm going to let you do this yourselves. But let's just read the question. Consider the possible association between self-esteem and academic grades discussed in this chapter. First, describe the relationship using both an inductive and a deductive approach. Second, suggest how both approaches could be incorporated into one study. So sometimes we may not have time in class to do a classroom activity. I will always have extra questions for you to practice for yourselves. If we can't get to it in class, it doesn't mean you let yourself off the hook. Go home, it's on the slides. I'll be putting up the slides today. Use that as a practice thing, because it has been discussed in class, and even though it's not in the question bank, it might be a bonus question. Okay, the bonus question doesn't have to be from the question bank. That's something extra. Okay, so use these exercises. Consider this exercise, give it a shot, and see how it works out. If you have any questions, come talk to me, and we can go work through this problem together. Okay, so now let's address the questions behind the chapter. Okay. So how do the questions asked in qualitative research differ from those asked in quantitative research? Let's assume this is a 5-mark question. So typically, if that is a 5-mark question, I want you to be able to tell me at least 5 things, okay, and how the questions differ. So let's think about how do the questions differ in qualitative versus quantitative?
Qualitative would be more generalized, I guess, and qualitative would be less generalized because it involves people's feelings and emotions and experiences phenomenologically.
Okay, whoop, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
It's okay. Quantitative, I think, would be more generalized.
Yep, so generalizability. So for those of you with touch screens, you might find that you're able to manipulate the slides just as well as I am. My request to you is to not at the moment, just so things don't disappear on me. I can't spell as usual. Okay, so generalizability is a big thing then. So Aretha, you gave 3 answers in 1 answer, so that's good. So okay, generalizability, and then you said emotions and feelings and perception, right? Emotions, feelings, perceptions. And what would be the opposite of that for quantitative?
Things you can measure?
Thank you, Connie. Yeah, measurables. Okay, so we have 2, 3. We want 5 differences. 5-point question, 5 differences. Students in the class, don't feel shy.
One more thing, the quantitative, the measures are fixed. They don't change. So like we did a synopsis last week of a person wondering about transportation. Like if you met them today when the transport was on time, they'd have one response. If you met them tomorrow when it's a bit late, they would have a different response. Quantitative doesn't change like that. From the moment you...
So the units of measurement remain the same.
Yes.
Whether you measure length today or you measure length tomorrow, it will still be centimeters.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay, and that's fine. And so you're going to have to, this is good, but it tells you that we have to fix how you express yourself. You have the right idea, right? But when you write for an exam, units remain constant and quantitative. I'm not breaking it down, but since we're talking about it, you know actively when we're talking about quantitative versus qualitative. Cassandra had a response in class.
I was actually just going to ask, the term measurables, is that synonymous with empirical data, or is there kind of...
So measurables typically means empirical data, okay? Yeah, anything that's tangible and measurable ends up being empirical. Yes, yes. So in case you didn't hear the question, did everybody hear Cassandra's question? I think it was quite clear and the microphone probably picked it up. But if you want me to repeat, just let me know because I'm assuming everyone can hear.
She asked something about measurables. What are measurables?
So yes, she was asking about the correlation of measurables and empirical data. Are they the same? Are you talking about the same exact thing? And empirical typically means measurable and things that you can experience and measure and things like that. So yes, for all practical purposes, empirical equals measurable.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we are up to 3. I want 2 more. The questions. Yes. So Marianne says inductive versus deductive reasoning in order to answer the questions. 100%.
I guess that would mean that the question that how you ask the question, one versus the other, one would be exploratory, while the other one is looking for like a hypothesis or a specific answer to that.
Yes, so if you didn't hear Cassandra, Cassandra says, well, one would be more exploratory, like qualitative, and the other would be more of, well, you know, one causes the other, and hence you have measurables that you actually end up measuring. And that's true. That's what we talk about being positivist, right? You know that one thing is related, or you believe one thing is related to another. So your questions tend to be positivist or more open-ended, depending on whether it's quantitative. So if you want a refresher, in case we don't remember how to differentiate between the two, we can just go back to, so we have 5 differences there. Sorry, I'm sure we can't see. Okay, there we go. In case anyone was taking notes, it's all getting recorded, so I'm not saying that you have to take notes. Anyway, so the best thing is to go back to our slide, which will be up today, and look at quantitative versus qualitative. And as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 differences between the two. For a 5-point question, I'm not expecting 13. Give me 5 and you'll get the full score, okay? All right. Next question. What kind of information is obtained from qualitative methodologies? What kind of information do you get from qualitative methods? Let's make this a 3-point question, so 3 things.
Information that you develop themes.
Sorry, Connie, I'm going to turn up the volume a little. If you don't mind saying it again.
Is that information that lets you develop themes?
Yeah, information on feelings, and Marianne said the same thing, information on feelings.
My answer was to develop themes. Is that the same?
Developing themes, yeah, absolutely. You have information on developing themes or ideas. They are different things. Your information on feeling is one thing. For example, what does it feel like when on a beautiful summer day you have to imagine that you're a child now or someone that loves amusement parks. What does it feel like when you're in Wonderland, Canada's Wonderland, on a beautiful summer day? The weather is absolutely gorgeous and you can smell, I don't know, sorry? Funnel cakes, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah, there you go. So what does it feel like? That's feelings, okay? And that's phenomena. That's a phenomenological sensory stuff. Themes is a little bit different. So if I asked you, well, talk to me about your education at Laurentian, and we have a big discussion, and there are many questions, follow-up questions. We have 30 minutes conversation, and then I sit down later with the transcript and I start to find themes. I want to get away from my parents. That seems to appear often. Or I love outdoor activities. Can't do it in Toronto, so it's nicer to come up to Sudbury. Or Laurentian gave me the best deal in terms of bursaries and student loans. So there might be different themes that come up. So they're actually two separate things, which is a good thing. Okay, so the two kinds of information, definitely. You can develop themes and get an idea from qualitative methodologies. What else can you obtain from qualitative methodologies? Individual meanings? Yeah, it is descriptive. The data is descriptive, but what do you get out of that data is these kinds of things, right? Almost everything in qualitative tends to be descriptive in nature, with the exception, yes, Courtney. Right. So would it be any different than what we spoke about individual meaning? It is the same idea, right? Oh, I'm sorry, my chicken scratch is awful and I've blocked what my students can see in class, which is not helpful. Sorry, but that works a little bit better. Okay, yes, so individual meanings are individual realities, constructed realities. These are different kinds of information you get from qualitative methodologies. Okay, now, next question is, what kind of information do you get from quantitative methodologies? I don't want one person giving me all three answers, because I think a lot of you know now what you'd get from quantitative. What kinds of answers do you get? Empirical, measurable. So Marianne says empirical. It's not that qualitative is not empirical. They're also measurable. The only problem is you may not be able to compare the measures between two separate individuals. They're still measurable. Like if someone feels someone cheated on a test and you talk to them about the experience of what they experienced because they were caught doing something, the feeling of shame is that person's alone as they talk to you. Hopefully they're willing to talk to you and they're going through this process. You might talk to somebody else who feels guilt and shame about something else they did. Yeah, they're similar, but they're still different. Right? Each person's experience may be a little different. So it's measurable, but it's different. However, if you're measuring the heights of individuals from your phys ed class, yeah, they're different, but they're all centimeters. They're all going to be more centimeters or less centimeters. That's not going to change. So that's
more structured. Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's more structured. The measurement process is more structured.
Rigid, structured. Structured is absolutely right. Yep.
And also you can see a positive or negative correlation between the variables. I don't know.
Correlation between variables. Yes, and a lot of quantitative tends to be positivist. So yes, 100%, Samantha. And again, you know, if this were a 3-point question, you'd be fine. If it were 5 points, you can think of 2 more. It's easier to answer. So all of this is in the textbook. This is just when you go through the chapter, you're going to find more than 3. We're just picking up a few, so at least you get a sense for how to answer these questions. How's deductive reasoning? So let's answer part 2. How's deductive reasoning linked to quantitative research? So quantitative research equals deductive reasoning, right? You deduce something. Qualitative, sorry, go ahead.
Just a refresher. Deductive reasoning is when you start generalizing, you narrow it down, right?
Correct.
Okay. How is the reasoning linked to quantitative? Because you take a sample from a population and then you narrow it down and then you get better statistics, I suppose, as to what it represents.
Okay, so the answer is all there. Most of you have the answer. When you answer this on a test, I want you to make up an example if you like. So we've spoken about several examples in class, okay? So make a pretend example, number of hours of study. Okay, and marks on exam. And you can pick any example you like. You don't have to pick this. You can make up, and you know, you go 3, 4, 5, 6, and you find 60%, 70%, 80%. So because we're making this up. So basically what you're doing, your deductive reasoning is on the basis of this assumption, you find that the more hours you study, the more marks you get. So you're deducing that you have a bunch of data which demonstrates that the more number of hours you study, the more marks you get on an exam. Now for generalizability, because this looks like it's one student's effort for different exams, but generalizability, you will probably have a slightly larger table where you will go number of hours, but number of students studying these number of hours per exam, number of hours, and there's a number of students. You have 5 students, 7 students, 3 students. Sorry, let's erase that for a second. Number of hours would still be, oops, 3, 4, 5. So number of students studying these hours, and you have 5 students studying for 3 hours for the exam. You have 12 students studying for 4 hours. You have 4 students studying for 5 hours. Then you say average mark. So you end up taking averages. And then you have average 70%, average 80%, and average 90%. So this allows more generalizability because all of a sudden you're not looking at one student. You're looking at a larger group of students. So when you write a response, oftentimes because an exam is always a stressful situation, you're trying to think and formulate words. There are 2 ways to prepare. One is have your answers figured out ahead of time, which is why we're going through all these exercises. So have your answers written out, you know what to say. But say you get stuck, you forget something, it's okay, make a little graphic for yourself and then use the graphic to explain what you want to say. So it's deductive, because you're using numbers to come to a conclusion. Okay, you're using a large data set to come to a conclusion. The opposite of deductive reasoning is inductive reasoning, right? Inductive reasoning is linked with qualitative research, which is your next question, number 4. Is inductive reasoning linked with qualitative research? Why or why not? Okay, so we already have said that it is linked. So why is inductive reasoning linked with qualitative research? Cassandra?
Because qualitative research is more open-ended, it's more exploratory in nature sometimes.
Okay.
With inductive reasoning, you more start with an observation and you're open to change throughout. You don't, like you're not, it's not a hypothesis where you're saying this is correlated to this.
I am challenging all of you to speak in vocabulary that you haven't developed yet. Okay, so I understand, but Cassandra, you're on the right track. Cassandra was explaining to the class that you start with a smaller sample and you develop the research as you move forward, which is what qualitative research is, right? The reason it's inductive, when you induce something, basically you are looking at 1, 2, or 3 small samples, 2 people, 3 people, maybe even 1 person, and you are trying to predict what you want to ask of the next person and the next person after that and the next person after that to create your data set. You're inducing. So it's the opposite of quantitative, where you decide I'm going to work with 100 different people. I'm going to poll 100 different people. How many hours do you study? How many hours do you study? They give you a survey sheet, and then, hopefully they're happy to share what they got on the exam with you. And then you have this big, beautiful table that you filter down and you get your data. And lo and behold, you come to the conclusion, the more hours you study, the better marks you get. Inductive, a little bit different. How does it feel to prepare for an exam? That's your question. That's where you start. And then you start talking to people, and then you realize that the story goes on differently because people talk about different things that bother them. Well, I hate it. My roommate's so loud and obnoxious. They're always chatting and talking on the phone when I'm studying. It's disruptive. Another person says, I wish we would have food delivery on campus, or it would be easier. Sometimes the folks don't want to come, especially when I'm studying late in the night. There's no 24/7. So you start to understand that, oh, okay, well, I'm starting to get different answers here. And exam prep is a lot more than just sitting down with a textbook and reading, and this is what it looks like. So you're going bottom up, right? You're starting bottom up. You are deriving your information. You haven't decided what the answer is. You're deriving your answers from the responses that you get. And typically, if you have 5 students that have indicated to you that finding quiet space is hard unless you can book yourself a room at the library, then you get to the conclusion that it's actually quite challenging to find a quiet working atmosphere, which influences student performance in exams, which is quite different from, deciding that it's hours of study, and that leads to a final result. So inductive reasoning is linked with qualitative result. Yes, it is linked with qualitative results because it follows a bottom-up approach with a small sample size, and it takes the data obtained from a small sample and tries to extrapolate that to perhaps the same group itself, or maybe a slightly larger group, without making broad generalizations about the entire population. So that's the difference between inductive and deductive. Next question follows the same pattern. What's the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning? And it asks for examples. Now, if I give you all the examples, I'm doing you no favors. So well, I mean, I can, but I mean, you are taking the exam, not me, right? So I'd much rather say, think of examples. If you think you have a good example, but you're not sure, you can ask me about it. I'm happy to go over the example with you. What's the difference between inductive and deductive? We just answered all of that. A top-down approach versus a bottom-up approach, large samples that you work with when you come to your conclusions and your reasoning, and then here you go up with a small sample. Okay, so think of examples for yourselves. You know what, when we start thinking about examples, then we start to make it clear for ourselves. Okay, so always think of examples with this work in this situation. Okay.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes, Aretha.
As you just mentioned, midterm. On the overview, I see item 10 in bold, midterm exam, and they have 09/03/2020.
Yeah.
So far, that's looking like around the 9th of March. But I guess midterm week we'll know for sure, right? I mean, reading week we'll know for sure.
No, that is the date, the 9th of, unless it's not a Monday or a Thursday, and I've made those mistakes before, but the 9th of March is what I'm thinking for your midterm.
Okay, let me check. March 9 is on Monday.
Okay, so fair game. That's when your exam will be.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
And we will set it up so if you want to take it remotely, we'll have a different way. You'll have to turn your cameras on. Anyway, we'll not go into that because that is
Okay.
before the midterm. We'll break it down, and the midterm will not exceed 1 hour, and for the simple reason that we don't want it extending into other classes that on-campus students have. The other thing is, well, I'm going to try to schedule a 45-minute midterm if possible. 45 minutes is tight, so I'll plan for 45 minutes. I'll give you an hour and 20 minutes, and it's entirely up to you to finish it. It's not going to be unreasonable.
Okay.
Anyway, why can't data from focus groups be used quantitatively? So does everyone remember what a focus group is?
Yes, when we had the folks sit around the table and talk about their experiences with education last week, I think the reason that wouldn't be used for quantitative so much was we were trying to get what their experience was, what their feelings was, their thoughts, why they preferred that institution, and so on. So it wasn't something for empirical purposes.
Correct. That is one answer why you can't use, that is one absolutely correct answer, because you're trying to get thoughts and feelings.
Is
You
it
can't
also
use that.
because the sample, sorry to interrupt. Is it
Go
also-
ahead, Connie.
Is it also because the sample size is too small?
Correct. Very, very important. Small sample size. Okay. Big reasons why you can't use quantitatively. The third thing is, you don't ask for quantitative information from a focus group. You don't need to have people come into a room to check boxes and give you a sample sheet back. That's of no use to you. You are better off, for example, let's think about a focus group. So we did a focus group. How can we improve admissions processes at Laurentian? I think that's what we spoke about last time. Okay. If all I wanted was a bunch of boxes to be ticked, I don't need to bring people in to discuss about how to improve things, right? What's the benefit of getting all these people in a room to talk about, say, the Laurentian website, say bursaries, say advertising from Laurentian and meeting the liaisons? What's the advantage of all of these people discussing those things? Go ahead, Cassie.
The discussion, like open, free-flowing.
Free-flowing discussions. And what you get at the end of the discussion, which is very important, Cassandra said that the free-flowing discussion is what comes out of it. She's absolutely right. So I'm asking her a follow-up. What comes out of the discussion?
You get a richer
You have it, Samantha? Yes, but
I don't know what you'd call it. It's not
enriched
whereas in
themes.
a quantitative you'd have variables, but this is more themes and stuff like that. But I think we've already said that.
No, but you're on the right track. It's basically enriched themes, right? Because people discuss, they'll talk about things, and just amongst the discussions, you'll find some ideas or some parts of ideas start to disappear and fade away. And you'll find that some portions of the ideas start to get enriched and supported and find traction, right? So what you end up doing is you end up filtering through the most important things that come out. Right? And it's a beautiful process. I love focus groups personally, because focus groups actually get to the nuts and bolts of things. Even in a focus group, when you have 12 people sitting around a table talking about Laurentian's websites, when those 12 come in, they all come with a different idea of what should be done and what should be fixed to make it better. As they start talking and people start discussing with each other, one person thinks, hey, you should have more drop-down menus. Another person thinks, I hate blue, it's so depressing, we should change the color. Yet another person says, well, you know, I wish you had a live chat icon there so someone could chat with you while you're visiting the website. As you start to discuss, as you start to filter things out, you find that, the color is not such a big thing, but having the chat window there, super useful. Maybe drop down menus, not so great, but we would love it if every time you click something, it didn't take you to a page and say, oops, link not available, So within your 30 minutes of your focus group, if your website is one of the main things, you have the key things that you want to work with: priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, and people are, you can just get it from the richness of the discussion and the transcript. So it's fair to say that you get curated themes, for lack of a better word. And curated because people have gone through it, they've filtered through a lot of different stuff, and some things acquire less importance, some things acquire more importance. But essentially, it's not about numbers. So that's why you don't. And it doesn't make sense to use focus group for numbers. It just simply doesn't. That's not the point. Next question. I know we're going to have lots of answers, which is good. Anybody that hasn't answered yet, why is it not helpful to ask whether quantitative or qualitative research is better, or which is more important? Class participation is 20%, people. Don't give it up. Oh, Courtney. Depends on type of answer / end goal, according to Courtney. Okay. Anybody else? I think it's kind of a complete answer. Your method or your research is going to depend on the question that you're asking. If you are trying to get a solution, a generalizable solution, does the flu vaccine for 2020 work? It's silly to interview a bunch of people asking their opinions about the flu vaccine and how they feel going to the doctor getting it, or even do they think it's effective? What do you think about the flu? It's kind of useless. You're better off looking at, well, how many people took the vaccine and what's the incidence of flu amongst them? So if you recognize that 1,000 people took the vaccine, 998 didn't get the flu, you really want to use that data to decide whether you will use a flu vaccine. It's a completely different thing if you want to talk about, what do people think about the spread of coronavirus and how is it going to impact their travel plans. Then talking about the effectiveness of the flu vaccine is kind of useless. Okay.
So I'm not sure if this is true in every case, but a lot of times quantitative ones will start with a hypothesis, and they have the variables based on that hypothesis. Whereas qualitative, they will end with a hypothesis after they have collected the data and analyzed it and oh, it looks like this is what's happening.
You're absolutely right, and that's the answer to a different question. But I would use the word theory. I would use the word theory as opposed to hypothesis, because the hypothesis is. I will discuss the difference between the two. A theory is so a hypothesis is a proposal. A theory is basically either before the fact, which has been established due to pre-existing evidence, which comes in quantitative research, or which comes after the research. You see a bunch of things and you connect everything together and you make up a theory after your research is done. A hypothesis tends to be more of a suggestion. Hypo means on top, and the thesis is an extension or suggestion. So people use hypothesis and theory interchangeably, and we want to be a little bit careful when doing that. In general, day-to-day speaking, I don't think it would matter if you're talking to your friend over a cup of coffee. I hypothesize that or I theorize that. Doesn't matter. But when you're talking scientifically, you just want to recognize a theory is more established, a hypothesis is more of a proposal, a suggestion. Okay, so the question is, why is it not helpful to ask whether qualitative or quantitative research is better or which is more important? So in that sense, we kind of have the answer that it depends on what kind of solution or answer you're looking for. Okay. But Samantha, thank you for participating. Even if you answer something that wasn't asked, oftentimes it's still relevant to the course. It's always good. So continue to answer, all of you. Don't feel shy. And I have a little secret section on my tablet in which I'm taking notes who's answering and who's not. That was a joke. I don't. Okay. When is it appropriate to use primary data collection methods? When is it appropriate to use secondary data to answer a research question? So we didn't spend an inordinate amount of time talking about primary data collection and secondary data to answer research questions. Can anybody remind the class as to what primary data is?
Primary data. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's primary data is when you collect it yourself, and secondary data is when it's already been done, and like Stats Canada, and you use someone else's study, or not study, but data collection.
Secondary data. It doesn't have, okay, so using, I'm just going to say pre-existing data. Okay, so primary data, two things you got to remember. You may collect by yourself. You may have someone collect it for you. So if you are a student, you're probably doing the collection yourself. If you're a prof, or you're running an organization, you have your minions do it for you. Okay, and by minions, I don't mean to be disrespectful. You're people that work. Okay, associates. Let's put it that way. I mean, some people believe in strict hierarchies, so the associates may not fly. But let's be respectful and say associates. Okay, you collect yourself. You have your associates collect. The key thing about primary data is it's purposeful collection for a specific project. So you have a research project in mind. You're going after collecting data for this specific project. Could you be collecting additional data while you're collecting your primary data? Perhaps, but the intent still is to do additional research with that additional data. It's not, you're not randomly collecting stuff. Often, reality is researchers will often imagine doing far more experiments that they end up doing. So, and as a result, they end up collecting a lot more primary data, and they probably end up using small portions of it to complete their research and report on it. Secondary data. Samantha gave a good example of Stats Canada. Stats Canada collects a lot of data. Stats Canada would ideally like to be able to do research on all their data, but they have limited resources. They put out, for the amount of data they collect, the amount of reports they put out is rather minuscule. But they make that data publicly available so you or me can go through that data and connect one thing to another and draw conclusions. Secondary data could also be your own data. You may have collected a large amount of quantitative data or even qualitative data, large number of interviews to get a sense for something. You may not have used all of it. So for example, let's say you're collecting information on what it feels to have studied for 4 years at Laurentian University, okay? And when you do your research with say 20 interviews, you are looking at all the familial factors that made you come to Laurentian. 5 years down the road, you're thinking, well, my focus was on all the family-based decisions that made students go to Laurentian. I never looked at the financial aspect. Instead of interviewing 20 more people, you say, well, let me look at my old interviews because I bet you they all spoke about financial situations. All of a sudden, that has become secondary data because it wasn't purpose collected for what you initially planned. But it is useful and you're not going to throw it away, right? There are some caveats for primary and secondary data. Now, when you initially collect data, both interview or quantitative, sometimes you tell the candidate that we may use it for a specific research project and you have ethics approval and so on. Sometimes when you use the data for secondary purposes and it has identifying markers, you have to seek consent again from the individuals or the organization releasing the data to do secondary research on it. Oftentimes, as the data is de-identified, so let me give you an example. One of the studies that I conducted 4 years ago was to look at walkable neighborhoods in the city of Greater Sudbury. And what we were trying to, our hypothesis at that time was to say that the more walkable neighborhoods you have, if you're an older adult, the less likely you are to have ambulances come visit you because you're probably more active because your neighborhoods are walkable and you enjoy a better quality of life and greater mobility. That was the hypothesis. So we collected a bunch of geographical data. We contacted emergency services in Sudbury and we collected, well, for this neighborhood, how many ambulance call volumes do you have? And from the hospital, we collected data on how many hospital admissions occurred. All of this data was de-identified, which means we didn't know that John Doe or Jane Doe came from this address and this is what they had or anything of that sort. We just had numbers that this neighborhood, we had 50 ambulance calls. We also de-identified it to the point where we didn't know what condition it was. We just know that an ambulance was called. And the reason we did that kind of a study is because it gives participants complete anonymity. Okay, this is secondary use of data because this data was already there with the city of Greater Sudbury, was already there with the hospital, and was already there with emergency services. They already had all of this information. But it was secondary use of existing data. And the reason we still had to go through an ethics process to tell them, ask them permission, can we use this data? We don't know who it is, right? We're just getting numbers. Can we use it? And then it was okay to use it because there was no identifying information, so we didn't have to seek consent. However, if you've interviewed a bunch of people for, let's pick something that's not particularly the 4-year degree program. Going through the 4-year degree program at Laurentian, you've interviewed a bunch of students, they talk about different things, and you let them know the objective of this research is to kind of work on the familial decisions that led you to choose Laurentian. All of a sudden, you want to go back and use these same interviews to look at the impact of financial situation on that because you're going to now publish this data. If you are going to put in excerpts that end up identifying people, people have very specific speech patterns. You put in a certain paragraph, somebody else could identify them through that. Or maybe you might want to use just first and last initials. They could be identifiers. You might have to send these people an email and get consent. Can I use your interviews, exact same interviews? You don't have to re-interview. Can I use it again for a second study? Okay. Cassandra has a question.
I'm just thinking about qualitative, secondary use of qualitative
Yep.
data.
Yep.
As a researcher, interviewing somebody, getting their feelings about something, getting that all recorded. I don't know, I'm just wondering, secondary use of that, is there a worry that it could be like misconstrued? Like say if you're reading a transcript of that interview, rather than watching a video of the interview, and you're not the original researcher, is the data that you get from that valid or not valid because you weren't there to experience the feelings?
Okay, so this is a great question. It's a little bit of a segue, but we'll answer this because it's such a nice question. So Cassandra's question, did everybody hear Cassandra's question first?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. No, it's a good question. The question is, if you are the primary researcher who's captured all of this data through interviews, tape recording interviews, you were there in the moment, somebody else wants to use your data to do a second set of research on that data itself, a different kind of research, will they get the same richness of data? I think that was her primary concern. So I'm going to address that concern, and I'm going to address the ethics of doing such a process. We'll address both, just so you understand this a little bit better. So first of all, if at all possible, if you are a researcher with good skills, you probably want multimodal data capture. And what that means is, hopefully you have consent to videotape the interview, okay? Hopefully you have consent to audio tape if you can't videotape. The most inconvenient would be that you are scribbling notes furiously as you're talking to the person, because that gives you the least opportunity to build rapport, and it just feels like they are being scrutinized constantly if all you're doing is writing notes. Because they're thinking, oh my God, what is he or she writing, right? So if you have consent for video, the benefit of that is you're looking at a ton of nonverbal communication. And if your videotape is stored on your little thumb drive, your follow-up researcher wants to use it, they can look at that as well. Because the video will have audio as well, you're getting 2 in 1. Even better if you have transcripts to go along. So while the interviewer is saying something, you're looking at the video and you notice a certain kind of odd look, or the eyes go a certain way, or you see the arms cross over. You start to make conclusions. Okay, this is a sensitive topic. They don't really like answering this question. There's a little nervous. You start making a notes based on the visual. More importantly, if the researcher is different working with the set of primary data that is collected, it has to go through an ethics approval process, okay? Because all of a sudden, this person now is using data for which they have never sought permission, okay? Unless it's a team. So here's the thing, sometimes there are research teams. So then what will happen is, the ethics approval will apply to the entire team, and the team is able to go ahead and use that data. But if they change the purpose, they might still have to get ethics approval, because it depends on the topic, the sensitivity of the topic. So anytime you're using interview data for secondary stuff, you may have to go through an ethics approval, even though the ethics board may probably just look at it and say, you know what, this is not going to affect the well-being of anybody. That's why ethics boards are in place, to ensure that the general public in society, as well as the researchers, nobody gets hurt, nobody gets damaged. It's a do no harm principle, right? So
essentially, a good researcher wouldn't use written qualitative data in their as secondary research.
So
if you're like a good at research, then you would know, then you would get for that video and not.
You would try to get video. Some situations not possible, okay? Say I'm hiking to Mount Kilimanjaro, 7 days up, 7 days down. Despite having porters and everything, the temperature goes down, my batteries die, my video camera's gone, I'm stuck with writing stuff. Nothing you can do. I might be a very solid researcher, but nothing I can do. So you plan to get as much multimodal data as you can. And that's just because humans communicate a lot non-verbally. And it would be foolish to think that you would capture everything from written stuff, or simply audio, or simply live. You're physically present there for the video, so you should be okay. So experienced researchers are a very smart bunch, okay? They'll take the best that they can get. And, whether it is through Skype, whether it's in person, and so on. So anyway, getting back to the question, when is it appropriate to use primary collection methods? When you're trying to acquire data to do a research for which data doesn't exist. Secondary data is absolutely appropriate to answer a research question when you already have primary data which would help you answer the question. So it's an absolute waste of time to go back and collect, let's say, people's education level and income data when Stats Canada is just, it's out there, it's ready for you to use. It doesn't make any sense unless you're specifically saying, okay, how many people have an undergraduate in gerontology and what kinds of salaries are they making? Well, that's some data that Stats Canada won't have. So you might have to go in and specifically find that data. Compare and contrast 3 different methods of data collection. I don't know, if I asked this question, I would probably give it at least 6 marks because there's enough meat in there to answer. Because this question is as broad as it is, there are many ways to answer this. You can have 3 different methods of qualitative data collection. You can have 3 different quantitative. You can have 1 qualitative, 2 quantitative, 2 qualitative, 1 quantitative, doesn't matter. But you're going to have to talk about that method of data collection, and you're going to talk about how you'd organize your data and stuff like that. So let's say two marks per response. Okay, so because there are so many different ways of answering this, we won't do this in class because we could probably come up with 20, 25 ways easily. Okay. Ten is an interesting one. Describe how theories are connected to research questions in qualitative and quantitative research. So let's start first with qualitative. So you have a qualitative research question. How's a theory connected to the qualitative research question?
Is it created after the observations are made or based on the observations?
Theory is created based. So whenever you get a question which is as vague as this, help yourselves out by suggesting an example. The example does not have to be spot on, but think about an example. So for example, if you're collecting qualitative information on let's say role of family in enrollment at LU. Okay, and you end up with a bunch of different information, and then as Connie says, you create the theory, and then you have to relate it to the question. So how is the theory related to the question in qualitative research?
The theory would be based on the feelings, emotions, interactions, experiences.
That part is correct. Think about the question, think about the theory that you could potentially get. How would you relate the theory to the question itself?
The theory answers the question.
Yes, exactly. So in qualitative research, typically your theory will answer the question. Okay, let's look at the opposite. Let's say you're collecting quantitative data on, we'll have to pick a different topic, on socioeconomic status of the family and the decision to join Laurentian. So what is your theory here? We're going to start with the theory because we're going to basically have a hypothesis that families
Families with 2 incomes affect enrollment? There's more enrollment.
Right. So, Connie suggests that socioeconomic status impacts the ability to enroll at Laurentian. Something like that. Did I get it right, Connie?
Yes.
Close? Okay. Families who identify or whose income families with greater familial income have their children enroll in universities. So if that's your hypothesis, or your theory that families with a greater income base are able to send their children to university, and then you collect your data, and essentially your data would reflect your hypothesis, or maybe if you're completely incorrect, it would disprove your hypothesis, which are both fine in quantitative research. But the big difference here is your theory is dictating how you collect your information, your data, and the data is really reinforcing your theory as opposed to explaining something to you. Okay, so that's the big difference between how theory is different between qualitative and quantitative research. One thing that we didn't discuss, but it's self-evident in the description itself, is mixed methods research.
I found that a little difficult in research literacy. The mixed methods, seems to be just so much. Qualitative, I can focus on. Quantitative, I can focus on. But sometimes knowing how to inject the mixed method, very challenging, I found.
It's complex.
Yes.
So one of the things you have to understand is, when do people do qualitative research? Yes, obviously to get a sense for phenomena, get a sense for feelings, get a sense for perception, get a sense for attitudes. All of these things oftentimes end up being qualitative in nature.
Right.
But very often, really smart scientists who aren't tied to one way of research or another will use qualitative as a method to identify key themes that then they can go and do quantitative measurements on, right? So are you still there? Yes.
Yes, I'm still here.
I'm not sorry, not you, but
Oh.
my little app started believing that I'm not there while I'm recording this thing. I'm not sure why. And maybe it was my textbook. Anyway, regardless, if you don't know enough about a topic and you decide to go in with qualitative methodologies, just so you can identify what's going on, what the big themes are, once you have the big themes, say the big themes for getting admitted to Laurentian University is financial status of family, the ability to get loans, being geographically close, the desire to do outdoor activities and engage in stuff that you couldn't in big cities, and what's 5? Party school. So these are the, I don't know, I'm making this up. Is Laurentian a party school? You have no idea? Okay. I came from the university that I did my PhD in, the University of Vermont, was considered a party school. Okay. It was a top 100 university in the US. So it's a big deal because the US has thousands of universities. It was a top 100 school. But you'd get all these rich kids from Connecticut and Massachusetts who would come to UVM, or University of Vermont, for the sole reason that it was a party school. That's where you came, that's where you partied hard, and then your mom or dad got you a seat in Harvard. Western is a party school? Okay. Okay, so Cassandra says Western was the party school. I have no sense for that. I just think every school is a party school from where I stand. But anyway, so you end up with all of these 4 or 5 themes. So you end up getting 5 themes. And then you start to actually do quantitative measurements. So you start to say, okay, income range, we're going to identify what income range parents send their kids to Laurentian. What else did we say? Ability to get loans. So number of banks offering student loans, or OSAP, or, whichever way you want to look at it. OSAP is a loan, correct? Am I right? It
Yeah.
is a loan.
Yes.
Thank you. What else did we pick in our popular themes? Ability to play outdoor or engage in outdoor activity. And then we start to identify different outdoor activities available and which activities were factors for different students coming in. So on. So we start to put a quantitative spin to what started off as a qualitative study. And what happens is at the end of the study, you've not just identified themes, you've also provided a numerical database for people showing, well, these are the reasons that students come to Laurentian. And amongst all of these reasons, most students come to Laurentian because of affordability, or because of ease of getting loans, or because of the size of the city, or because you have more outdoor activities to do. So you start getting a nice mixed methods thing going on. So the difficulties, obviously, in conducting mixed methods research is that you rarely find scientists who are exceptional at both qualitative and quantitative. Okay, it's not impossible. There are several really good scientists who can do both. Even more challenging becomes you have to work with teams. Oftentimes there will be a qualitative team and a quantitative team, and they need to see eye to eye when they work. They need to understand and work with each other well. So there is that. What else? Let's see if a textbook offers any more choices. I think we have a few different options. I'm just going to go check. It's very expensive and very time consuming. So I'm just going to highlight from your book. Mixed methods is very, very expensive and time consuming, and getting the funds is a challenge. Anyway, research funds are declining all over, right? As there's not enough money to go around, so very few researchers are able to obtain the funds needed to conduct a good mixed method study. Most times, obtaining funding to do mixed methods research is beyond the ability of most experienced researchers. So it's an issue. It's quite challenging. The other thing is, even the actual process, mixed methods reports often look like two separate reports because there's a qualitative part and there's a quantitative part. Okay, novice researchers have difficulty contextualizing the research with other stuff. So it's called triangulation. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of time before you get good at triangulating your research. And most of you who have done research literacy know what triangulation means, or at least have a sense for it, right? It's the simplest way to think about it is, if you're stuck in the bush and you call 911, 911 has to get to you on the basis of your cell phone. What 911 does is it looks at how quickly your cell phone signal has gone to 2 or 3 different towers. On the basis of the time it's taken for you to send your signal out and for you to communicate with 911, they can actually say you are so far from one tower, so far from the other, and so far from the third one, and they can actually pinpoint you despite the fact that you have no GPS. They just use, so it's called triangulation, because typically to fix any point in space, you need 3 points. Okay, so in research, when you talk about triangulation to verify the quality of a paper, you typically need 2 or 3 different factors. And I think there was a whole chapter in research literacy where you focus on how you triangulate good research, right? Triangulation is always a challenge. Anyway, so those are the challenges with mixed methods. It's okay. All right, I think we only have about 10 minutes left, and I don't want to start off the next chapter. I typically like at least 15, 20 minutes so we can get into it. But what I'll do is I'll open it up for questions regarding all the content so far. If you want to ask questions about your midterms, that's fine too. And if you have nothing and you want to move on to your next activity, that is also fine with me.
Okay, Professor, I have to catch up on some reading, some of them chapter, the end of 3 and into
Yep.
4. So I'm going to go do that. So hopefully on Thursday, I'll be up to date with 5.
With your reading? Yes,
Yes,
always a good idea.
yes. All right then. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Have a good one. See you on
Same
Thursday.
to you. Bye.
Bye.
I have a question about the midterm, as in the logistics of it. I'm working on a computer that has a broken screen, and so I have to hook up to a television.
Correct.
I do have video that, you know, you could see me. I just don't know what, like, how does it look? Do I type in my answers?
Yeah, you would type in your answer, and your video would just show me that you are present in class. See ya, and it's meant to be a supervised exam, so that's the, you know, whatever is the best we can do. If you have a computer with a broken screen, you still have a few weeks. Any chance you might be able to get that fixed, or if you can borrow a laptop from somebody else for the exam?
I could try to borrow a laptop. The problem with getting it fixed is it's a minimum sending it away for 2 weeks. What the computer?
Oh, okay. See if you can borrow. Or the other thing is, do you have a smartphone?
Like a Samsung. I don't know. I think it's a smartphone.
Okay, if you could also take the exam at the library, is what Connie is suggesting. A library may be able to lend you a laptop to use while you're there, but I don't know if that's a quiet enough environment. Usually they are. Usually people don't scream at libraries. So you have a couple different options. Your third option, if you can't borrow a laptop, and if you can't use the library reliably, and you don't know if you have a smartphone yet, then I'm not sure. Let me know once you've exhausted these three
Yes.
possibilities.
Okay.
Then we'll think of a solution.
Yeah, because I've tried before my computer was broken. I've tried to access Laurentian University through the public library, and
Yeah.
there seems to be some kind of firewall when I'm.
Oh,
Yeah, it's interesting. But I can go to any other place like Tim Hortons or someone's house and access it.
yeah. Someone's house may work. Tim Hortons may not be conducive for you to focus.
No, I wouldn't do that. No, it isn't.
You just from
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
typically the last thing you want to do is get caught up in somebody asking you questions about what you're doing, and then all of a sudden your exams not happening.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll try.
let me know if it's you know, in a week or so you'll have a good sense for what you can and cannot do. Because the other option, like I said, if you have a phone on which do you have Facebook and all those things on your phone?
Yes.
Oh, then it's a smartphone. So
Okay.
that's a good thing. So you can actually set up your phone to videotape you while you take your exam on anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just you need to find a stable perch for your phone, because you can actually connect the Zoom meeting. You'll be connected as two people. You'll be connected through your phone and through your computer.
Okay.
So we'll just see Connie's name pop up twice, and that's okay.
Okay.
But then at least I'll have, basically I can supervise you while you're taking your exam.
Okay. I still might also look for another computer too, to see if as a backup.
And it's only going to be for like exactly an hour, really.
Okay.
Or an hour and 20 minutes, whatever the class period is.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll see you Thursday.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we just have Samantha, I think. All right, Samantha, looks like we don't have any more questions. So I'm just going to end the meeting.
Okay.
Unless,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. Have a good one, and we will see you on Thursday.
Okay. I haven't been able to find my exit. Oh, leave meeting. There it is. Okay.
Okay.